Hello, everybody. I'm Mark Thompson from the Inform team, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Data, Trust, and Microsoft 365 Copilot. As AI becomes more of a core part of our digital workplace, Microsoft Copilot is transforming how we work. It unlocks productivity, creativity, and efficiency across Microsoft 365. But with this innovation comes some important questions like, is our data safe? Are we compliant? What happens if we don't adopt AI responsibly? In today's session, we're going to talk about trust, governance, and readiness. We're going to explore how Copilot is designed to respect your existing 365 permissions, how it's governed by enterprise-grade compliance tools, and how you can monitor, manage, and safely scale it across your organization. But first, why don't we meet Nikki? So Nikki Chappell is a principal cloud architect at Cloudway and a dual Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in Microsoft 365 and security. Nikki has over 35 years experience bridging IT and business, specializing in helping organizations embed Microsoft 365 data security, governance and compliance into their digital transformation strategies and projects. So pleased to have Nikki here. Nikki, is there anything that you'd add to that, to what I've just said? And how can people get in touch with you or connect with you if they want to?
Yeah, so I suppose the thing to add is I've always been what I would call the translator between IT and business. I think it's really important to get that balance right between productivity and security. Too often we get security saying no, and maybe not allowing Copilot or various things, and then we kind of risk that shadow AI. So it's been able to break down complex things into business language and then being able to articulate the business requirements to the IT to get really a balanced and a risk-based approach. I think that's kind of really important.
Yeah.
And yet, if people want to get hold of me, I'm in LinkedIn, so Nikki Chappell. I've also got a blog post, nikkichappell.com. So I post a lot about Microsoft 365, Purview, Copilot, governance, risk and compliance, and also co-host a podcast, all things M365 compliance. So I co-host that with Ryan John Murphy from Microsoft. So feel free to subscribe to that. It's on Spotify and also the video version on YouTube. Thank you for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a privilege for us, Nick. I've seen you speak at conferences a number of times, and how I'd say that you humanize what's often quite a very complicated topic. So I'm so grateful that you speak, and I'm so grateful that you're here. But folks, why don't we get started? One of the most common concerns we hear is, what if Copilot shows me something I shouldn't see? Now, that is a fair question, especially in environments where data sensitivity and access control is critical. So let's start by clearing that up. Nikki, can Copilot access or expose data I shouldn't see?
Well, I suppose that's like a kind of a difficult question. Copilot doesn't introduce any new risks. Copilot can only see the data you have access to. So if you've got access to a SharePoint site or a Microsoft team, if you've been shared files, for example, then you can see it. However, we need to kind of unpick that a little bit. One of the issues is that we're not governing our Microsoft 365 tenants correctly. So if you're not reviewing the membership, the file permissions, etc., if you're in a team and that team's got 1 million files, maybe you shouldn't be seeing them all. So it's kind of important to say that it's not introducing new risks because that oversharing problem was already there. It's increasing the probability of data that you already had access to by being surfaced. So my analogy is, it used to be like finding a needle in a haystack. With search, you had to know which SharePoint site to look at, what was the name of the file, etc. And if you knew that type of information, and if you were clever enough with the search, you could find it, but it was like a needle in the haystack. Now, with Microsoft 365 Copilot, I can be stood outside of that haystack, and I've got a big magnet, and all of those needles are going to come and find me because I could write a prompt to say, show me all the information about the pay rise information of the board members of the company, for example. And it's going to surface any of those files that you have access to. So it's going to search your OneDrive, so it can search your emails, but any SharePoint sites that you have access to, or files that you've have been shared. So, having that good governance is important. Another risk, I would say, and a big risk that people are probably not aware of, is when you create Microsoft 365 groups and teams, we have a setting called public and private. If it's if you've got teams, check this out when you go back. Important, check to see if you've got any public teams and groups. If it's public, that means people can self-join. Now, even if I haven't self-joined that team, the SharePoint site, which is where all the files are stored in the back end of that team, has got a set of permissions called everyone except external users. That means by default, even without being a member of that team, I have access to the data in that SharePoint site. And as I said earlier, SharePoint respects my permissions. I've got access to every single public SharePoint site in your tenant. Therefore, Copilot has. So that would be kind of like my kind of number one top tip, really quick thing. Go and look in your admin centers, see which of those ones are set to public, and check they really should be available to everyone in the organization. For example, an intranet can be available. If you're using Viva Engage, maybe for social communications, sharing the pictures of your cats and dogs, well, that's fine if everyone has it. But if you suddenly see that the HR team has been set to public and that HR team has got, sensitive information about our employees, then go in and change that setting from public to private, and that will immediately change the permissions and say only members of the team have access.
Nikki, I think there might be a few people having a little shudder thinking about the fact that they might have an open team and they look and they say only these 10 people are members of this team, but the fact that Copilot can still access it, I think that is a super is a super point. But Nikki, this reminds me of when Delve first came out, and people used to blame Delve for surfacing information, but it wasn't Delve's fault. Delve was more like a canary in the mine. It was just showing you there was a problem, and I think it's a bit like that. Okay, so folks, I'm just checking in the comments. I don't see any questions or comments down there. If you have got a question or comment, so quite tight for time, make sure you put your questions in the chat, especially for that topic we've just covered. But Nikki, should we move on?
Yeah, let's go on to the next one.
Okay, so this is a saying, we can only protect what we know. And when it comes to AI, that is true. Nikki, how does Copilot ensure that sensitive or regulated data stays protected, even while we're all trying to work faster, trying to work smarter? How does that still work?
Okay, so with Microsoft 365 Copilot and the enterprise version of Copilot Chat, what you can be assured is that data is not being shared with the public domain. That data remains in your tenant. The models in the back end are not learning from your data. So that's the big distinction between using enterprise ready tools as opposed to ChatGPT, which is a consumer thing. If you put your search and your prompts in ChatGPT, you can get some good quality results from that. No doubt, it's a good service. But when you put information into a prompt with something like ChatGPT and the files you upload, then that's being used. The large language model will use it and consume it and make their models better, and then potentially resurface that data out to people. So there have been stories in the press where large companies have fallen foul with that, and people in the best interest, Copilot isn't available in the organization, I'll use ChatGPT instead, and then they've shared confidential information. So with Copilot, Microsoft 365 Copilot, there's obviously several guardrails in places. First is if you're using sensitivity labels on your files and your emails. So if they're all labeled like internal, confidential, strictly confidential, and you can have like the traffic light colored labels on them as well, then when Copilot is referencing that data, so it could be a file that you've uploaded in the prompt, it could be working in a new file and say, create me a file based on this other file, or whether it's just pulling back content. it is aware of those sensitivity labels on those files. And what it does is it will check all of the references and it will apply the highest level sensitivity label. So when you configure your labels in the Purview compliance portal, you set a priority. So public label is the lowest priority, because it's general, available for everyone, and highly confidential or the equivalent would be the highest priority. So it's important to have those priorities in place in Purview, because that's what Copilot's looking at. So I could have been referencing a public document and a highly confidential document. In the responses back, it would then say that this is highly confidential because it's used some information. So this is super important. For example, if you're in Word and PowerPoint and you want to say, create me a document from this other document, it's going to automatically label it for you. And then, that label has got permissions that are encrypted, then it would also apply that as well. So that's super important. Now, also, the benefit of having those sensitivity labels on the files is we can control what Copilot can actually access. So if I've got a highly confidential label, for example, and I was in a call before this, and it was to do with some medical research data, and they've said this research data must not be used by Copilot. They've got some other tool that they're going to use, proprietary thing, so we don't want to use Copilot. So the recommendation was to label that content with a specific label, maybe highly confidential, sub-label, not accessible by Copilot or whatever the name is, block Copilot. Then we can create a data loss prevention policy. And what that will do is when you try and either share data in the Copilot chat and upload the file, if you reference the file in the chat, or even if you open the document, it will say is if it's got this highly confidential block Copilot, then Microsoft 365 Copilot cannot access the content. So when you open it in, say, a Word document, what you will see is the Copilot icon is grayed out. So you can't actually use Copilot within the document. And then if it's using it within the Copilot chat, it will say, I can see this file, but it's restricted. So I'm unable to view the contents. Now, it's going to show you files that you, again, always have access to. So it's not going to show you any other files that you don't have access to. So you as an individual can go in and open the file, but Copilot can't summarize that content. So that's kind of a couple of things you can do. If you're also a techie person, so in the Microsoft Purview Admin Center, there's a product or a service called Data Security Posture Management for AI. Nice short name there. Call it DSPM for AI. And that will give you some reports of who's using Copilot. And potentially you can also do it for third-party Gen AI apps as well. But you can see what sensitive data is being shared. And so with that, you can not only see like kind of the sensitivity labels, which you can use to block Copilot or not, but you can use what's called the sensitive information type. So Microsoft provide a suite of effectively tags that they're tagging all the content in the background. It could be, this is address information, this is credit card information, this is IT credentials. So they've got hundreds of those already pre-prepared, but you can create your own as well. And again, so this is what it's doing, is it's then saying what type of data is being shared with Copilot, what sort of data is being shared with other third-party Gen AI. Once you kind of got that sense of information, you can start sort of putting those controls in place. So it's super useful that these Purview tools will allow you to not only look at the Copilot, the Microsoft 365 Copilot, you can start looking at things like Security Copilot and all of the other agents and things that you have as well within the kind of Copilot suite of applications. So at the end of the day, it does kind of boil down for the hard controls, the data loss prevention and the kind of classification. You need to be classifying your content. So Microsoft have a blueprint. It's called Purview Secure by Default Blueprint, and it goes through a number of stages. Questions I get is, well, we've got millions of files already. How do we know how to classify them? My view is Let's look at that at a later date. Let's put some good governance in place. Let's get some labels out. Microsoft even recommends some labels and push out some default labels in the newer tenant. Start using those new labels for new content and edited content. That's your active content that you're working with. At least that data is getting labeled. And then as you kind of work on that, then you can start focusing on your priority content, your existing content, and classify that as you go. So it's an iterative approach. If you try and tackle it all, it's like lifting up the box and saying, oh my God, I've got millions of files in my SharePoint sites. I don't know where to start. And you just kind of get in that kind of loop of, this is all too complicated. Where do I start? Let's have some simple steps. Let's put in guardrails going forward, and then we'll start tackling our existing files.
Okay, Nikki, what I take from that, the thing I loved from what you just said is a couple of things. We can apply a label, and Copilot is not allowed to access anything with that label. And of course, people would be terrified of how much they need to do. Anything new that we create, you apply the labels as it's new, and then as it's edited, we do it as we go along. I love that. Okay, folks, let's move along. We've talked about some big stuff there now, and you might think, oh, I'm not ready to use Copilot yet. But why? How about the fact that when we hesitate to adopt Copilot, we do it out of caution, and that's absolutely right. But ironically, that can create new risks. If people can't use trusted tools, they will find workarounds. And you've heard one from Nikki already, such as ChatGPT. So we're going to talk about the risk of doing nothing. And also, folks, in the chat, I would like you to just put to list all the AIs, or the things that are like ChatGPT that you can think of, all the things that you've heard of, or other shadow IT that people might use. So, Nikki, what are the risks of not using Copilot in our organization, and how does shadow IT come into play there? And while you're doing that, I'm going to look at the chat, folks. Okay. I'd like to see some AIs in there, please.
Yeah, so some of the risks of not using Copilot. So, there are instances where, security say, no, I think our data's not of good enough quality. We think we're going to be surfacing all of this data. So last year, and it was May 2024, Microsoft and LinkedIn had a report, and in there they'd stated that 78% of people that were using AI were using their own favorite AI tools. And, often that's ChatGPT tends to be the most common one people know, but somebody's put in there kind of DeepSeek, which is a Chinese one, Gemini from Google, etc. So people are using these tools. So if your company is not providing them, people are finding that actually these Gen AI tools are actually a benefit, and it's helping them with their productivity. So for me, I've been in this industry, as like Mark said, for over 35 years. It's the first time I've actually seen end users coming to IT and say, I want some technology. We've had to fight people kicking the screen. We had to move them from paper into email, and more recently email into Teams. And that's still going on. And Teams has been around for 6 years now. And still people are still wedded to working in emails and everything. So that's kind of a long drawn out process to get those cultural change. ChatGPT, that hit kind of 100 million users within 3 months. Super fast adoption. Everybody wants it. It's like a gold rush. It's a modern day gold rush. Everyone wants it. So your company are not offering it. So what will happen is they are using the shadow AI tool. So 78% of people have found their favorite tool. Now, worryingly, people get used to using those tools, and we know what it's like. Change management is always hard. People have had a couple of years to get used to ChatGPT. So the question is, when you open up Microsoft 365 Copilot, is, well, I'm happy using ChatGPT. That does everything I need. I'm used to doing that. Why do I need to move into Copilot? Yep. People do not understand, I think, that the risks of using these models. People don't understand that every single thing you put in there is being consumed by most models. those models. You know, you can put your CV in there with your date of birth and your address and everything and say, update my CV. Well, you've shared then your personal data, and that could be surfaced out. And I think it was Samsung in 2023. If you have a Google that, and their Gen AI breach. You know, there was a lot of publicity about it at the time, where you know, people had shared secure code with you know,
Yes.
the models to say, oh, here's my codes,
I
this is the other
know.
thing, let's get my scripts working better, how can I improve it? Or go in and say, well, you know, put some text around it, make it look pretty, etc. And of course that's confidential to the company, and you've lost it. You've
Yep.
immediately lost it. So if you've shared customer data in there, that's effectively a data breach.
Yeah.
So people are not interested in their day-to-day job. They come into work. Most people just want to get on, want to do their job. They want to find the quickest, simplest way of doing it. Security is not always top of mind. So we need to educate users. So a lot of this is like the user adoption and the change management, to make people aware of what would happen. You know, if somebody shared your personal data in there, you wouldn't be very happy. So then it's making sure that the tools are available, making sure people are aware of using the right tools in the organization and the consequences of not using. So we've got options. So we can just monitor it. We can monitor the third-party AI usage, or we can put technical controls into blocks. So somebody had put in DeepSeek. DeepSeek's a Chinese one, and I think a lot of companies that I know don't want anything to do with Chinese companies, and they've immediately blocked it either at the firewall level, or we can do it in Defender for cloud apps. We can do it in there. We can do it Defender for endpoint, multiple different locations. So if someone goes to DeepSeek, says, no, this is blocked in the organization. We can also block it from data loss prevention policies. So we can say some data we can share, sensitive data we can't. So that's really kind of the risk. It's really that user education. You know, this is not a technology change. You know, this is a kind of a strategic transformation in the organization. And as any change management, you know, people have to unlearn, they need to relearn, and that can take, you know, 6 months or so, can't it, Mark? You know, that adoption
absolutely.
journey. It's not just switch it on and off you go.
Yeah, of course, Nikki. And I think what's interesting about ChatGPT is I know so many non-technical people who pay for it themselves. Like you said, it's just been amazing. But folks, let's get back to work. Speaking about work, if you don't adopt Copilot in some form or educate users, they will use something else. The longer you leave it, the more they've got to relearn a different system that they've got used to another one. But also, I think just letting people know some of the things that Nikki said there, and the risks of using shadow IT. It's not just that we don't want you to use it. Actually educate people about what's happening with that data that's going out. If they're free, then you know, you're the product, not the customer. So bear that in mind. Folks, we're going to go onto our next topic. We're going to be a little bit quicker on this one. So we're going to spend just 2 or 3 minutes on here. Visibility is key to trust. If we're going to roll out Copilot responsibly, we need to know how it's being used, by whom, and for what. And that is quite right that we know all that stuff. Microsoft does give us the tools to do just that. So we're going to talk about keeping Copilot activity transparent and auditable. Nikki, how do we monitor and audit the use of Copilot once we put it out there?
Okay, so we'll be using Microsoft 365 Copilot as part of that Microsoft 365 suite. All of the activities are already being audited from a security perspective. So it knows when you open a file, it knows when you're using Copilot, it knows, you know, it's recording the prompts and responses, because, you know, that's stored potentially for e-discovery, legal purposes afterwards. So because that information is stored, audit logs is stored for 180 days. If you're not an E5 or A5 or customer, if you're A5, E5, then it's stored for a year, unless you want to pay more money or export it somewhere else. So we've got that there. Now, that's a technical tool, and if you look at it, it's quite complicated to work through. So what we've got is this DSPM for AI, Data Security Posture Management for AI, in the Purview Center. That will show you your Copilot, Copilot Studio, Security Copilot, types of usage, and we can drill down to see who's been doing what there, because we've got that audit data, and we can see a rolling 30-day view. We can also, if you've got like E5 licenses and you manage your devices, we can track third-party AI usage as well. So we can bring that in. So that's one area. That's more from the technical area, more from the security and the compliance, making sure people aren't doing the wrong thing. But taking the snapshots of the reports without the identifiable personal data is useful for adoption. To start off with, you'll probably have much more ChatGPT than you do Copilot. As your user adoption processes are working, we want to see Copilot going up, and we want to see ChatGPT or other ones going down. So it's good to get that snapshot of kind of making sure we transition people across. Now, in addition from that, in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, we've got your usage reports and we've got your adoption reports there. So we can see Copilot activity there. The third thing that we can use is also Viva Insights. People might not be familiar with this or think it was an additional license. So now you get Viva Insights with your Copilot licenses. So you can actually have some Copilot reports and usage by departments and groups. You can also, report on, groups by, what's their meeting culture or their communication culture. We can now see the Copilot level as well. That information in Viva Insights is grouped by departments, and there's minimum group sizes there. So what's happening in HR, what's happening in finance, for example. You can even put in qualitative data. So rather than just the quantitative data, so what people are using it, is it of value? You can pull in survey data, so you can kind of get the hearts and minds from the users. What does it mean for me? Do I feel better in my work? Is it really helping me? So you're bringing in quantitative and qualitative and pulling it in. And soon you're going to be able to bring in things like KPIs as well, and saying, by using Copilot with this group of users, are we closing sales quickly? So there's kind of 3 different areas that you can kind of get data from. So it's super comprehensive.
Lovely. Nikki, before we move on, I just want to say I love how data security posture management for AI just trips off your tongue. I can just about say it. It shows how many times that you've said that. Okay, folks. So we have 6 minutes left. Remember, this runs till to 12:35. So we're going to be a little bit tight for time, but this one is definitely worth us covering, and we're going to spend maybe 3 minutes on this. So, Nikki, a big concern we hear is our data governance isn't perfect. Can we still move forward with Copilot? And you can. So, Nikki, can we still go for Copilot if our data governance isn't quite perfect yet?
Yeah, I think so. I think because, the risks of people will use Gen AI tools. I think, that's going to happen. So if you're not providing the tool, people will find alternative tools to do that. So the idea is you can roll this out in phases. You don't have to have everyone in the organization. So you can check that. You can actually put the governance. So I would put it in place, have a phased rollout with Copilot with the adoption. And then in parallel to that, let's put in some good data security and governance. So it's key things that we can do quickly is, get the sensitivity labels in for new and edited files. Let's put some governance at the SharePoint site level and the workspace level. So if you know what your sensitive teams are, you have something called SharePoint Advanced Management. You probably don't notice or be aware that this product, again, is available. Even if you've got one Copilot license, you can use all the functionality. So we can put controls in to restrict Copilot. So we can say, actually, I want to start off, and might start off with, I only want these up to 100 sites. That's restricted SharePoint search. Put my teeth back in after that one. So you can have up to 100 sites that Copilot can use. So that could be, we'll just use those. Or we can use restricted content discovery. So that's super important if you've got sites with thousands or millions of files in it. I mean, you're not really sure what's in there. So restricted content discovery effectively only will show you files in that site that either you've created or you've interacted with in the last 28 days. So Copilot will only see that. You've got, when you go inside the site and search the site itself as an end user, you can search for any content, you can access any content. But SharePoint is limiting that content, because we all know that we've got these historical sites potentially where we've migrated everything in from all of the on-premises stuff and merged stuff, and we really don't know what's in there. So there are sort of controls can go in. So the Microsoft Purview secure by default blueprint is useful. It's got this kind of staged process. Do it in parallel with adoption. It's too late to wait. I think Copilot is needed unless you've got some other alternative enterprise ready solution. But if security continue to say no, people are going to be using these other products.
Nikki, that's going to be emblazoned on my mind. It's too late to wait because of the appetite from the consumer side of the world, people to use ChatGPT. I think that's a really good point. It's too late to wait. And I think something else you said to me, Nikki, you said Copilot doesn't create new risks. It simply reveals existing risks. And if it reveals them, you can fix them, right? So I like the canary in the mine analogy. The risks are there. You might as well get them surfaced and get them dealt with. Okay, folks, call to action for you. We've got about 90 seconds, 2 minutes or so left. I want you to think about this as you go away. Who in your organization needs reassurance about data security and compliance? Your stakeholders, IT, legal, compliance, and end users. Who needs clarity for you to be able to move forward? What guardrails and governance do you already have? What can you use? So think about sensitivity labels, DLP, access reviews, and you can create that safe environment for Copilot to operate. And how will you enable and encourage safe adoption and avoid shadow IT? So think about your plan to support users, educate them, and keep them within the boundaries of trusted tools. And not just end users, the people behind the scenes who have to look after the admin side of the world. Okay, so Nikki, before we just wrap up, we've talked about lots of topics. And some of it was rather technical. Is there anything that you'd like to say to wrap up before we move to questions that you just like to add, or just wrap up, or just put a lid on what we talked about?
Yeah, I think for people that haven't started their Copilot journey yet, and that they're not blocking, the other AI tools, then you have an issue. It's not a risk, it is an issue. People will be using those tools. So go into that data security posture management for AI portal in Purview. And if you've got the E5 licenses, sorry, it's kind of not the smaller licenses, but you can hook up your endpoints and do some other technical controls. It's relatively easy to, but then you can start seeing your third-party AI usage. And that can be a wake-up call, because if people are saying, I think it's too risky to use Copilot, if you can demonstrate that these people and so many people in the organization are already using these tools, particularly if you start seeing things like DeepSeek and things like that in there, then that can show, well, this is the current issue you've got. How we're going to mitigate that? Well, you mitigate it by bringing that activity into Copilot.